The first time I saw her, she was standing on my dad's wheelchair ramp with a measuring tape and a clipboard like she was a government official. She wasn't. Her name was Lenora Vexley, president of the HOA board, and a royal pain with a superiority complex the size of Texas. I was just getting out of my truck, arms full of groceries, when I spotted her blocking the ramp. My dad, who's paralyzed from the waist down, was at the top of it in his motorized chair with his eyebrows drawn together like he was trying not to curse her out. "Lenora," I said, setting the bags down on the porch, "what the hell do you think you're doing?" She didn't even flinch, just tapped her pen on the clipboard and said, "This ramp isn't HOA approved. It violates the community aesthetic." I blinked. "The ramp is for my disabled father. It was built to code and permitted. You're not the city. You don't get a vote." She sniffed like I'd offended her delicate sensibilities. "The board has received multiple complaints. It's too steep, too industrial, and it's visible from the front sidewalk. That's a violation of subsection 10.3 of the guidelines." My dad grunted. "I've lived here longer than you've been alive, lady." She turned to him without a shred of shame. "And we appreciate your contribution to the community, Mr. Callan. But it's important we maintain uniformity. I'll be issuing a notice. You'll have 30 days to remove it." I stepped between them. "The hell you will." She smiled like she'd already won. "You can appeal it in writing, Kenneth. But I wouldn't waste my time. The board's unanimous." That was the beginning. Over the next week, she ramped things up, pun intended. First, we got a written violation. Then came the fines, escalating from $50 to $250 in a matter of days. I appealed every one, citing the Americans with Disabilities Act and the city permit I had framed in the garage. She ignored it all. Then came the real stunt. I left for work early Monday, and when I got back, I found Lenora had parked a massive concrete planter at the base of my dad's wheelchair ramp. Just sat it there like a blockade. My dad had been stuck in the house all day. Couldn't get down. Couldn't leave. "You're lucky I had food left in the fridge," he said when I came through the door. "I called you 3 times. My phone had been dead. I didn't even get the voicemails until I plugged it in." I stormed outside, took one look at the planter, and lost it. It had the HOA's logo stenciled on the side. I called Lenora. She didn't answer. I marched down the street to her house, pounded on the door. She opened it with the same smug little grin and a glass of white wine in her hand. "Is this how you treat disabled veterans now?" I snapped. She sighed, like I was being dramatic. "It's a temporary placement. We're testing new landscaping features for the neighborhood. Nothing personal." He couldn't leave the house. "And yet the ramp remains in violation. Maybe this will encourage you to take appropriate action." I nearly lost it. But instead of blowing up, I walked away. That night, I called the city inspector's office. I had copies of everything: permits, photos, ADA guidelines, emails, timestamps. I uploaded them all into a Dropbox and sent it to the inspector. I made sure to note the obstruction and the unauthorized planter installation, along with photos showing Lenora parked on my property multiple times to inspect the ramp. The inspector called me back the next morning. "Yeah," he said, "that's not just a violation. That's a legal obstruction of an accessibility feature. I'll be out today." I took the day off work. So did my neighbor, Terrence, who'd had his own run-ins with Lenora after she tried to fine him for painting his shutters maroon. He brought donuts and coffee and set up a lawn chair on my driveway like we were watching a parade. By noon, the inspector had arrived. He was a tall guy in a city jacket with a very serious face. Lenora must have seen the city vehicle, because she came marching down the sidewalk with her clipboard like she was going to offer assistance. "Is there a problem?" she asked, all fake concern. The inspector looked at her, then pointed to the planter. "Who placed this obstruction?" Lenora didn't hesitate. "The HOA. As part of a community beautification project. It's temporary." He narrowed his eyes. "Did you file a permit for it?" "No, but we don't typically need." "You do when you're placing something that blocks an ADA-compliant accessibility ramp." She faltered for a second. "Well, the ramp isn't compliant. I've already issued a violation." The inspector turned to me. "He has a permit. It's on file with the city. You're in violation, and you've committed an actionable offense under the ADA." Lenora's face went pale. "I suggest you remove the planter immediately," he continued, "before I issue a formal citation and refer this to the city attorney for obstruction of accessibility access." Lenora tried to argue, but the inspector didn't care. He told her she had 24 hours before the city brought in a removal crew and tacked the cost onto her personal property taxes since she was the one who ordered the placement. That should have been the end of it. But Lenora wasn't the kind of person who took a loss gracefully. The next day, the planter was gone, but she had something else planned. It started with a construction crew showing up at her house. They were building something on the front of her porch, a new addition, from the looks of it. I watched from my window. Something wasn't right. They were extending her porch out past the HOA setback lines. I knew this because I'd been forced to memorize every inch of the guidelines just to defend my dad's ramp. Terrence came over. That porch isn't legal. I nodded. I know. She didn't file a permit either. So I made another call to the inspector. And this time, I sent drone footage. The moment she'd started building, I launched my drone and recorded the whole thing. I even narrated it like I was David Attenborough. The inspector came back that afternoon. This time, he brought backup. 2 city code enforcement officers. They didn't even knock. They walked straight onto her property and started taking measurements. Lenora saw them and stormed outside in her signature linen pantsuit. You can't be here without notice. One of the officers held up a clipboard. We have probable cause and video evidence of unpermitted construction. Step aside. I watched from my porch with my dad beside me, sipping lemonade like it was a summer blockbuster. Within an hour, the officers taped off her porch. The inspector issued a stop work order. When Lenora tried to argue, they handed her a notice of violation and told her the city would be demolishing the illegal addition within 72 hours at her expense. And just like that, everything started unraveling for her. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Because I'd found something even worse buried in the HOA's annual report. And once I connected the dots, I realized this wasn't just about my dad's ramp. This was about money. And Lenora had been funneling it into her own house for years. I spent the next 2 days glued to my laptop. Lenora's illegal construction project had triggered something. Not just frustration, curiosity. Something about the way that crew showed up. No permits, no paperwork, like they had done it before. Like they knew they didn't need to worry about consequences. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a one-time flex. It was a pattern. The HOA bylaws had a section on discretionary improvement grants. At first, it sounded innocuous, just a fund for beautification projects across the neighborhood. But the language was vague. Too vague. I dug deeper. The annual budget, which I downloaded off the HOA's public archive, listed $27,000 in landscape and structural enhancements over the past 2 years. But when I matched addresses to the listed improvements, only 3 properties had received any upgrades. All 3 had something in common: the owners were current or former board members. And Lenora's property? It had received over $9,000 in porch restoration and yard elevation. Except, that porch didn't exist until last week. I printed everything, highlighted connections, and organized it into a binder. I wasn't just going to call her out, I was going to bury her in her own paperwork. Terrence came over that evening carrying a 6-pack and a folder of his own. You're not going to believe what I found, he said, dropping into a deck chair. Lenora's husband? He's listed as the contractor on half the projects the HOA's paid out for. Yard work, painting, even fencing. All of it billed under community vendor contracts. I stared at him. That's conflict of interest. She can't approve payments to her own household. She's been doing it for years, said Terrence, cracking a beer. And nobody questioned it because the board meetings are closed door unless you formally request access in writing, which no one ever does. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind of heavy quiet that comes when everything starts clicking into place. She's laundering HOA funds into her own property, I said finally, and using violations to distract from it. Terrence nodded. She's got the board in her pocket. Most of them are retired, don't even check the books. They just rubber stamp whatever she puts in front of them. I stood up, pacing. We need to open this up. Make it public. If the community sees what she's doing, she won't survive the fallout. Terrence grinned. I've got a projector and a portable screen. We host a community movie night on the green. And instead of a movie, we show them the real horror show, the books. 2 days later, flyers started appearing on doorsteps. Community night. Transparency in action. Bring a chair. Bring a neighbor. We didn't mention Lenora by name. We didn't have to. Word spread fast. People were still buzzing from the porch demolition, and curiosity was a wildfire in a dry field. By Saturday evening, over 60 people had gathered on the community lawn, lawn chairs and blankets scattered across the grass. Lenora showed up halfway through the setup, wearing a silk scarf and her trademark condescension. "What exactly is this?" she demanded, arms crossed. "A gathering," I said, adjusting the screen. "HOA residents coming together to discuss budget transparency. You didn't submit a public event form. I'm not using HOA property. This lawn is owned by the city. Already confirmed it with Parks and Rec." She narrowed her eyes. "You're not authorized to present financials." "I'm a resident," I said, holding up the binder. "And these are public records, downloaded from the HOA site." She opened her mouth to argue, but people were already settling in, murmuring, pointing. The last thing she wanted to do was make a scene, so she retreated to the back, pretending to be a passive observer. I clicked the remote. The screen lit up. Slide by slide, I walked the crowd through the numbers. Not just the spending the patterns. Repeated payments to Lenora's husband's company, which didn't even have a website. Disproportionate upgrades to board members' homes. Fines levied on the same 10 homes repeatedly, while others predictably. Friends of Lenora never received a single citation. Murmurs turned to outrage. A woman in the front row raised her hand. "My neighbor got fined for painting her fence beige, but Lenora's house has 3 different colors." Another voice from the back. "She told me I couldn't park on the curb, but her son's truck has been there for 4 months." I let them talk, let the noise build. Then I brought up the last slide, a recommendation to petition for a full audit of the HOA by an independent third-party accountant. "If we get 20% of the neighborhood to sign," I said, "we can force a vote to remove board members and freeze discretionary spending until the audit's complete." By the end of the night, we had 93 signatures, more than double what we needed. Lenora left without a word. That Monday, we delivered the petition to the HOA office, a converted sunroom at the back of Lenora's house. She refused to answer the door, so we slid it through the mail slot and filmed the whole thing. The next week was chaos. Lenora tried to fight back. She sent out a newsletter claiming the audit was unnecessary and politically motivated. She accused us of harassment, of falsifying documents, of inciting division. But the community wasn't buying it anymore. One by one, homeowners started speaking up. People who had kept quiet for years suddenly had stories. Lenora had threatened to revoke pool access over a misplaced trash bin. She'd screamed at a teenager for riding a skateboard on the sidewalk. She fined a single mother for hanging laundry outside. Everything was unraveling. The city inspector returned not for Lenora this time, but to oversee the audit. He'd seen enough red flags from her earlier violations to trigger a formal investigation. He brought a municipal auditor, who requested 5 years of financial records. Lenora stalled, claimed she needed time to compile them. The auditor didn't wait. He came back with a subpoena. Within 72 hours, the city had frozen the HOA's accounts pending review. The board tried to circle the wagons, but only 2 members showed up to the emergency meeting. The rest had already resigned. The ones who stayed were clearly panicking, unsure whether to protect Lenora or save themselves. That's when the rail bomb dropped. The auditor revealed that over $30,000 had been funneled through a shell landscaping company registered under Lenora's maiden name. It had no employees, no equipment, and no legitimate business filings. Just a P.O. box and a list of invoices. She'd been paying herself. The city filed charges for fraud and embezzlement. Lenora was arrested in her driveway, in full view of the neighborhood. No scarf this time. Just handcuffs and a blank stare. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. But I did wheel my dad out onto the porch, and we watched as she was driven away in the back of a city police cruiser. He didn't say anything, just reached out and tapped the armrest of his chair, like he was finally breathing easy. That week, a temporary board was appointed by the city. They reached out to residents for volunteers, and after some convincing, I agreed to join as a transitional advisor. Not because I wanted power. I just wanted to make sure no one like Lenora ever got it again. Terrence was appointed as treasurer. He smiled when he saw the clean balance sheet and said, "Finally, something I don't need to highlight in red." The ramp stayed exactly where it was. The planter never returned. And the porch? The city auctioned off the materials to pay restitution. Every plank, every stone, every nail Lenora had paid for with stolen funds was stripped away and sold. She builded on lies. We took it down with truth. The first meeting of the transitional HOA board took place inside the old elementary school gymnasium on Langston Avenue. The city had barred all meetings from taking place at previous board members' homes, so we ended up in a room that smelled faintly of floor wax and chalk, with rows of metal folding chairs and a basketball hoop hanging like a forgotten relic over our heads. I wasn't thrilled to be there. I'd never had any interest in HOA politics before Lenora weaponized the bylaws like a tyrant in a pantsuit. But as I looked around at the dozen or so residents who'd shown up, some with notebooks, some with tired eyes, I realized this wasn't about politics. This was cleanup. And I owed it to my dad and everyone else who'd been steamrolled to finish the job. "Let's start with the budget," said Marlene, the interim board chair appointed by the city. She was a retired auditor with short silver hair and the bluntness of someone who hadn't had time for nonsense since the Reagan administration. "We're going to rebuild this from the dirt up, but first we need to know what's still salvageable." Terrence passed around printed spreadsheets, each one marked with red and blue annotations. The red columns weren't just deficits, they were gaping wounds. Fraudulent vendor contracts, misdirected maintenance funds, overpriced consulting fees that led nowhere and did nothing. David, a soft-spoken man who ran a small landscaping business out of his garage, raised his hand. "My company bid twice for the community lawn maintenance contract. Never heard back." Then I saw trucks pulling up with no business markings. I figured I was too small time. "You weren't," said Marlene, flipping to a highlighted section of the report. "Those contracts went to shell companies tied to the previous board president. We're submitting all findings to the city attorney for restitution review." Someone in the back row let out a slow whistle. It didn't stop there. Cheryl, who ran the youth soccer program, revealed that her request for field repairs had been outright denied last spring despite the budget claiming that $4,000 had been spent on recreational infrastructure upgrades. That same line item turned out to be for a custom patio heater installed on Lenora's back deck. The room got quiet. Not angry, not shocked, just tired. People had known something was wrong. They just hadn't realized how deep the rot went. After the meeting, I walked out into the parking lot with Terrence. The air smelled like cut grass and pavement dust, and the sun was hanging low behind the trees. "She built a kingdom," he said, "and ran it like a monarch. No wonder nobody pushed back by the time anyone noticed. She'd already cemented herself at the top." I looked over at him. She cemented herself so well, the city had to pry her out with a subpoena. He snorted. "You think she's going to try to come back after this?" "She won't be allowed near an HOA board again," I said. "Not without triggering a background check that screams felony fraud." "Still," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "people like her don't just disappear. They regroup. They find cracks." He wasn't wrong. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. Not from Lenora. From a law firm. A cease and desist addressed to me, claiming that I'd defamed her character during the community presentation, that I'd spread misinformation with intent to cause reputational harm. I read it twice, then handed it to my dad without saying anything. He skimmed it, let out a dry chuckle, and tossed it onto the coffee table. "She's trying to scare you," he said. "That's all she's got left." I scanned the firm's letterhead and realized the address wasn't a high-rise downtown. It was a shared office space in a strip mall next to a laundromat. The lawyer she'd hired wasn't a litigator. He specialized in estate planning and small claims. I took a photo of the letter and forwarded it to Marlene. She called me 20 minutes later. "She's bluffing," she said. "I've already spoken to the city attorney. All your documentation is protected under whistleblower provisions. If she pushes this, it'll backfire in open court." Still, I wasn't interested in playing defense. So I got proactive. The next board meeting, I introduced a motion to create a resident oversight committee, 3 volunteers unaffiliated with the board who would review all major contracts, expenditures, and fines before they were approved. No more closed-door decisions. No more unchecked authority. It passed unanimously. A week later, we held elections for the committee. David joined, along with a retired nurse named Evelyn and a high school civics teacher named Marcus. Neither of them had ever attended an HOA meeting before the scandal. Now, they were front and center, eyes sharp, pens ready. It wasn't just about catching fraud. It was about rebuilding trust. Then came the landscaping audit. For years, Lenora had claimed the HOA paid for common area maintenance, trimming hedges, mowing community lawns, planting seasonal flowers. But when we actually toured the grounds, we found long-neglected medians, dead shrubs, and a rusted irrigation system that hadn't worked in at least 4 seasons. We hired an independent firm to assess the damage. The report came back with a quote, $17,000 in deferred upkeep, plus another $6,000 to bring everything back into code compliance. That same week, a resident named Ron who lived in a corner house near the tennis courts showed up at the board meeting with a folder. He laid it on the table and said, "I've got drone photos from the last 2 years. Same angle, same timestamp, every month. You can see when the grass stopped getting cut. You can literally watch the weeds take over." The photos were damning, and they proved something even more valuable. The HOA had been billing for services that were never rendered. We filed a formal complaint with the state's Consumer Protection Bureau. The city attorney added it to the growing list of charges. And still, Lenora didn't back down. She filed a counterclaim accusing the board of harassment, wrongful removal, and emotional damages. She claimed we'd violated her rights by holding a public audit without allowing her to defend herself. It was nonsense, but it meant we had to prepare for court. Marlene reached out to a pro bono legal group that specialized in community fraud cases. They sent a young attorney named Priya, who had a calm voice and a spine of steel. She reviewed the entire file, then told us we had more than enough to not only dismiss Lenora's suit, but to countersue for restitution on behalf of the HOA. 3 weeks later, we were in county court. Lenora sat at the plaintiff's table in a navy blazer that looked like it had been dry cleaned that morning. Her lawyer made a lot of noise about due process and damaged reputations, but Priya dismantled his argument with surgical precision. She produced city permits, financial records, and vendor invoices, each one signed by Lenora herself. Then she introduced evidence of the fake shell companies complete with tax IDs, registration dates, and overlapping addresses. She even had a witness, a former board member who testified that Lenora had pressured him into approving payments without documentation. The judge took less than an hour to rule. Lenora's suit was thrown out with prejudice, and the HO was awarded $32,000 in restitution. She paled. She didn't speak. She just stood there, frozen, as the judge read the order into the record. Outside the courthouse, Terrence turned to me and said, "Well, that's one way to trim the weeds." I didn't laugh. Neither did he, because we knew this wasn't over. The neighborhood wasn't magically fixed. There were still residents who were wary, still neighbors who didn't trust any board corrupt or clean. Rebuilding takes longer than tearing down, but we were on the right road. And the ramp, the same one that started all of this, had just been approved for a city-funded weather canopy. Not because we asked, but because a council rep had seen the footage during the audit and pushed it through as a gesture of goodwill. Justice hadn't just shown up. It had stayed. The first time I saw the new mailbox, I knew something was off. It had been installed overnight at the edge of the cul-de-sac, where our street met the main road. It was taller than regulation height, bolted into a slab of concrete, and surrounded by a decorative wrought iron fence that blocked the sidewalk on both sides. A shiny plaque on the front read, "Community Mail Hub Property of Maple Glen HOA." The problem? We didn't have community mail hubs. Every house in our neighborhood had its own mailbox, just as it had for the past 30 years. This wasn't a renovation. This was a land grab. I stood there staring at it while my dad rolled up next to me. "That new?" he asked, eyeing the structure like it might lunge at him. "Wasn't here yesterday," I said. He squinted at the plaque. "You think this is Lenora's doing?" "She's out," I said. "She's got no power left." He rubbed his jaw and didn't say anything. That was the thing about men like my dad. After you've seen enough of the world's underhanded moves, you stop believing anything is ever really over. Later that day, I brought it up at the board meeting. Marlene was reviewing the revised maintenance contracts when I interrupted. "Sorry, but something weird went up at the end of the street. A fenced-in mailbox hub. It's blocking the sidewalk." Marcus leaned over to Evelyn. "Did we approve anything like that?" "No," she said, flipping through the last 2 meeting minutes. "Nothing about a central mail system." I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo. Marlene frowned. "That's a problem. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction to install structures on city easements. Blocking foot traffic is a code violation." Terrence tilted his head. "Unless someone's trying to reassert control through a proxy." I knew what he meant. Lenora couldn't act directly anymore. But if she had loyalists left on the sidelines, they could still stir trouble. We sent a report to the city's Public Works Department. 2 days later, a city inspector confirmed our suspicion. The mailbox was both illegally placed and unsecured. No permit, no coordination with USPS, and no right to obstruct public walkways. But when the city came to remove it, they found it chained shut from the inside. The fence had been reinforced overnight with padlocks. Whoever had done it was daring someone to cut it down. The neighborhood split into two camps. Some thought it was a misguided attempt to modernize. Others saw it for what it was, an echo of the old regime, trying to claw its way back in. Then came the anonymous letter. It showed up in Marlene's mailbox, typed on plain white paper with no signature. "The current board lacks visionary leadership," it read. "This neighborhood needs order, not chaos. Without structure, property values will plummet. The true guardians of Maple Glen will not stand idle." It didn't take a detective to read between the lines. Evelyn called an emergency session. "We need to get ahead of this before it turns into another circus," she said. "We've cleaned up the finances, but if the old guard starts manipulating infrastructure..." "They're testing us," I said. "We let this stand, we open the door to more of it." We voted to file a city injunction. Within 72 hours, the city posted a notice on the mailbox hub, scheduled for removal pending safety review. But the day before it was supposed to come down, it caught fire. I was asleep when Terrence called me. His voice was sharp. "Get outside. Now." I ran out in sweatpants and boots. Smoke was curling into the sky from the far end of the street. By the time I reached it, the mailbox hub was a scorched carcass. Melted metal, blackened concrete, and the smell of burnt plastic hanging in the air like a threat. The fire department arrived within minutes, but there wasn't much to do. Whatever had been inside had burned fast. No injuries, no homes damaged, but the message was clear. Someone had burned it before we could remove it. They wanted control of the narrative. The city logged it as suspected arson. No witnesses, no security footage. Too fast, too clean. And then, just when we thought the drama had hit its peak, we discovered the shell company wasn't the only one. Terrence and Marcus were reviewing old board emails, ones the city had seized during the audit, when they found a thread between Lenora and a man named Oliver Bright. He'd been listed as a consultant on community development. On paper, he'd only been paid $1,700 over 2 years. But then Marcus cross-referenced that name with the property records. Oliver Bright wasn't a consultant. He was the owner of a property management firm registered 3 counties over, and his name appeared on the deed of a vacant lot right behind Lenora's house. The lot was zoned for residential development, and the HOA had spent nearly $8,000 upgrading the fence between that lot and the greenbelt under the guise of community safety enhancements. Marlene stared at the records. She was prepping that land for development. Probably planned to sell it to him under the table, use HOA funds to dress it up, then cash out. We brought it to the city again. They launched a deeper investigation. This time, they pulled the property transfer logs for the past 5 years. 3 other lots, all adjacent to common areas, had been purchased by Shell LLCs linked to former board members. The HOA had been quietly shifting land ownership for years. The city froze all transfers within the neighborhood. They also began proceedings to reclaim illegally sold easements, citing misuse of community funds and fraudulent filings. It was a sweeping blow, one that exposed how far the rot had spread and how deeply Lenora's influence had infected the system. But it also revealed something else. A resident named Alma, who lived 2 blocks over, came forward after seeing the news. She was in her 60s, quiet, kept to herself. But she'd been a notary for 30 years, and she remembered something odd. "Lenora had me notarize transfer documents 2 years ago," she said. "Said it was for a landscaping easement. But the paperwork, it didn't look right." Alma still had copies, digital scans from her records. When we compared them to the official filings, we found discrepancies in the signatures and dates. They'd been backdated to make the transfers look older than they were. When the city attorney saw that, he added forgery to the growing list of charges. By the end of the month, Lenora's name was in the news again. "Former HOA president faces new charges in real estate fraud scheme," read one headline. Another said, "Maple Glen scandal deepens, land theft and forgery alleged." Her bail was revoked. She was taken into custody a second time, this time without the option to buy her way out. The neighborhood didn't celebrate. There were no parties, no speeches. Instead, people began showing up to board meetings in record numbers. Not to complain, to volunteer. The oversight committee expanded from 3 to 5. Terrence launched a community website with real-time budget updates. Evelyn started a neighborhood watch, not for crime, but for policy abuse. A rotating team of residents reviewed every new project. No more rubber stamps. No more secrets. As for the ramp, the one Lenora once tried to erase, it became a symbol. The city installed a bronze plaque beside it, in recognition of community resilience and the citizens who stood for integrity. I didn't want it. Neither did my dad. But the neighborhood insisted. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the air turned gold, I sat on the porch beside him. He pointed at the plaque and said, "Funny thing. What's that?" She tried to make the ramp disappear. And now it's the only thing set in stone. I didn't say anything. I just leaned back in my chair, watching the street that had once been ruled by fear settle into something steadier, something honest. Justice hadn't just visited Maple Glen. It had unpacked its bags and moved in.